The New Thing, a Silicon Valley story, by Michael Lewis. Hello, and welcome. I'm glad you're here with me today. I want you to imagine something. Picture yourself on the deck of a sailboat in the dead of night, in the middle of the North Sea. It's December. The wind is howling at 70 miles an hour, and waves the size of small buildings are crashing over the bow, flicking ice-cold foam 30 feet into the air. This isn't just any sailboat. It's the Hyperion, the largest single-masted sloop ever built. A gleaming white vessel nearly 160 feet long, with a mast that rockets 189 feet into the clouds, a chain of receding crucifixes against a furious gray sky. And on this boat, in this storm, a German television soundman has dropped to his knees, crawled to the side, and is vomiting into the sea. But even as he's retching, he lifts his microphone into the air to capture the sound of the storm. He has a job to do. You might think this is a test of a boat. But you'd be wrong. As the Dutch shipbuilder, Walter Huisman, mutters to himself, his face a mask of dread, it is wetter to test people, not boats. And where's the man responsible for all this chaos? The man who dreamed up this impossible, computerized vessel? He's not on the deck with the others, clinging to the rails. No. He emerges from below, where he's been fiddling with his computer, and crawls along the side of the violently pitching ship. He makes his way to the bow, places a hand on the base of his giant, swaying mast, the very rod of his ambition, and simply looks up. What is he looking for? Nobody knows. He's not thinking. He's groping. Groping for what comes next. That man is Jim Clark. And that scene, that perfect storm of ambition, technology, and human drama, is the heart of Michael Lewis's masterpiece, The New Thing. This isn't just a book about business or technology. It's a story about a particular kind of person, the kind of person who lives on the frontier of what's possible, the starter of new things. A person who is not content with the world as it is, and possesses a relentless, almost painful, need to change it. By the end of our time together today, you will understand the mindset of the person who, more than almost anyone else, lit the fuse on the internet boom. You will see how one man's impatience, his restlessness, and his desire for a strange kind of revenge didn't just make him a billionaire 3 times over. It fundamentally changed the rules of capitalism and shaped the digital world we all live in today. So, let's begin. Let's set sail into the turbulent world of Jim Clark and his unending search for the new thing. To understand the story of Jim Clark, you first have to understand the world he was rebelling against. In the 1950s, the ideal American businessman was what a writer named William White called the organization man. This was a man in a gray flannel suit who worked for an enormous, stable corporation like IBM or Etant. His highest virtue was conformity. He believed in the group over the individual, and his goal was to fit in, to be a well-rounded man. Brilliance was suspicious. Words like eccentric or introvert were liabilities. The system was designed to smooth out the sharp edges of human personality. Jim Clark was all sharp edges. His story doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts in Plainview, Texas, a town so flat and beige it seemed designed to diminish the human imagination. Clark described his childhood as growing up in black and white, thinking the whole world was a pile of dirt and he was sitting in the middle of it. His father was a violent alcoholic who abandoned the family. His mother worked tirelessly, but they were deeply poor. In school, Clark was a troublemaker. He smuggled a skunk into a school dance, set off firecrackers in lockers, and was finally expelled for telling a teacher to go to hell. He seemed destined for absolutely nothing. At 17, he escaped by joining the Navy. And this is where the story takes its first fascinating turn. The Navy gave him an aptitude test, but Clark, having never seen a multiple-choice test before, didn't know you were only supposed to pick one answer. When several seemed plausible, he circled them all. The Navy accused him of cheating and put him on a track for juvenile delinquents, shipping him out to sea for 9 months of the most disgusting chores imaginable. But something happened in that crucible of humiliation. He returned with a burning desire for revenge. Not a petty revenge, but something deeper. He discovered that for him, success was the ultimate form of revenge. He took his first math class and scored the highest grade. The Navy, surprised, tested him again. Same result. This boy, who was considered unfit for high school, had a staggering, natural gift for mathematics and logic. Within 8 years, the high school dropout had earned a PhD in computer science. But the academic world couldn't hold him either. He bounced between jobs, got fired for insubordination, and by the age of 38, he found himself in a dark hole. His second wife had just left him, saying she couldn't live the way he lived anymore. She wanted a more settled life. He'd been fired. He was a failure. He recalled thinking, "My God, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this fucking hole." And then, in a moment of what he called self-imposed psychology, he changed. He developed a maniacal passion to achieve something. It was as if he decided, overnight, to reinvent himself. He was a professor at Stanford at the time, tinkering with a special computer chip. Suddenly, the best graduate students were flocking to him, wanting to be part of his project. That project was his first new thing. He called it the geometry engine. You have to understand, back in 1979, computer graphics were rudimentary. Clark had a simple but profound insight. The world is three-dimensional, so the computer world would have to be too. The geometry engine was a chip that could process 3D graphics in real time, essentially giving the computer a sense of sight. It was magic. And almost nobody saw it. He offered to license his invention to the giants of the day: IBM, Hewlett-Packard, December. They all turned him down. One engineer from Lockheed saw a demonstration of a car being designed in 3D on the screen and said, "That might be good for designing cars, but I design airplanes," completely missing the point that this technology could be used to design everything. But Hollywood got it. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas came knocking. The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, the mind-bending special effects that would define movies for the next 2 decades, they all sprang from that little chip Clark and his students built at Stanford. So, Clark did what any ambitious person in his position would do. He started a company. He called it Silicon Graphics, or SGI. He attracted the best and brightest engineers in the world, who left safe jobs at places like Bell Labs and Xerox PARC, because they saw the future in what Clark was building. SGI became a phenomenal success. But here, the old conflict returned. To build the company, Clark needed money. He went to the venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, the financiers who bankrolled Silicon Valley. He sold a huge chunk of his company for what seemed like a pittance. As the company grew more and more successful, he and his engineers, the creators, found themselves owning less and less. The power shifted to the money men and the professional managers they brought in to run the company. And the man they brought in was the perfect embodiment of the organization man, Ed McCracken, a star executive from Hewlett-Packard. McCracken was everything Clark was not. He wore suits. He loved consensus. He spoke in a smooth, professional, and slightly phony tone. He looked at Clark's band of brilliant, argumentative, highly oppositional engineers and decided they didn't need a CEO, they needed a therapist. What followed was one of the great culture clashes in corporate history. McCracken hired a corporate psychologist and sent the entire senior team on a 3-day retreat. They were given personality tests that classified them as supportive, analytical, promoter, or controller. McCracken was a weak analytical. Clark and almost every single engineer he'd hired were strong controllers. Another test sorted them into personality types on a pie chart. All of the engineers landed in a single sliver of the pie, a slice the psychologist had labeled highly oppositional. The engineers wore it as a badge of honor. To them, oppositional just meant sticking to your guns when you knew you were right. But to McCracken and the financiers, it was a problem to be managed. Slowly, methodically, they pushed Jim Clark to the side. He was the chairman, the founder, the visionary, but he had no real power. He was, in his own company, a disruptive force that needed to be contained. This drove Clark mad. It wasn't just about the money. It was a deep, philosophical offense. He believed in his bones that the people who create the new recipes, the brilliant engineers, were the ones who mattered most. He saw the venture capitalists and the managers as parasites, suckerfish clinging to the great white shark of innovation. And now, the suckerfish were in charge. As SGI became more successful, Clark became more miserable. He saw another storm on the horizon that no one else did: the personal computer. He knew that Moore's law, the rule that computing power doubles roughly every 18 months while its price falls by half, meant that one day, cheap PCs would be able to do everything his expensive SGI workstations could do. Microsoft would eventually eat their lunch. He screamed at McCracken and the board that SGI had to cannibalize itself. It had to build a cheap, low-end product to compete with the PC, even if it destroyed their profitable high-end business. If you don't destroy yourself, he argued, someone else will. But big, successful companies hate that kind of thinking. It runs against every instinct for self-preservation. They ignored him. And so, Clark retreated into another dark hole. He found himself a man with a title, a fortune, but no purpose. He started flying model helicopters in his front yard. He bought a motorcycle and rode it too fast, eventually shattering his leg in a crash. And he bought a sailboat and started teaching himself to program it, calling young Indian engineers at SGI, like Pavan Nagam and Kitu Kalluri, from the middle of the ocean to help him fix bugs in his code. He was escaping. He was groping again, looking for what was next. Lying in bed with his broken leg, he wrote a paper outlining his new vision. He called it the telecomputer. The idea was to turn the television set into a computer, bypassing Microsoft's monopoly on the PC. It would be a virtual VCR, delivering movies on demand. He believed this was the new thing. It wasn't. But it was close. He pitched the idea to Time Warner, who loved it. They agreed to pay SGI millions to build a pilot system for an interactive television ITV service in Orlando, Florida. Suddenly, every major media and tech company, Atant, Microsoft, Oracle, piled into the interactive TV craze. Clark had, once again, pointed toward the future. But just as the project got going, Ed McCracken took it over and pushed Clark out of the loop. It was the final humiliation. In early 1994, Jim Clark walked out of the company he founded, a wealthy man, but a defeated one. He told his friends he was going to show them all. He was going to get properly rich this time. He was going to invent a new role for himself, a role where the creator, the guy with the idea, wins. Not the financiers. Not the managers. The guy who finds the new thing. He didn't know what it was yet. But he was desperate to find it. And to do that, he knew he needed smart engineers. He reached out to a brilliant, cocky 22-year-old kid from the University of Illinois named Mark Andreessen. Andreessen and his friends had written a piece of software in college called Mosaic, the world's first popular web browser, a simple tool that lets you navigate the strange, chaotic world of the internet. At first, Clark and Andreessen talked about building applications for the interactive television world. That's where all the big money and smart people were going. But one day, sitting at Clark's kitchen table, Andreessen casually mentioned, "We could always build a mosaic killer." And in that moment, everything clicked. The internet. Not the television. The internet was the thing. It was slow, it was clunky, but millions of people were using it, and the numbers were doubling every year. Clark realized he was looking at the personal computer all over again, back in its infancy. This was the real underbelly thing that could challenge Microsoft. He was often running down another dark tunnel, but this time, he had a feeling it had no end. He and Andreessen hired all the original Mosaic programmers from Illinois and formed a new company. First they called it Mosaic Communications, then changed the name to Netscape. And this is where Jim Clark didn't just build a company, he rewrote the rules of capitalism. He went back to the venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, but this time, he dictated the terms. He went to the most famous VC in the Valley, John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins. Doerr, at the time, was reeling from some bad bets on pen computing and interactive TV. Clark had rescued him from that dead end. Clark made him an offer that was unheard of. He essentially told Doerr, "My dollars are worth 3 times what yours are worth." He was valuing his own idea and his team of 7 recent college graduates at a staggering $18 million. Any other VC would have laughed him out of the room. But Doerr, sensing he was looking at the future, agreed on the spot. It was a defining moment. For the first time, the power had decisively shifted from the financier to the creator. The engineer with the concept was now king. What followed was a blur. 18 months after its founding, before it had made a single dime of profit, Clark pushed for Netscape to go public. His CEO, a seasoned executive named Jim Barksdale, thought it was insane. But Clark had the power now. On August 9, 1995, Netscape sold its shares to the public. It was, as Lewis calls it, the great brainquake. The stock, offered at $12 a share, rocketed to $48 on the first day. 3 months later, it was at $140. The Netscape IPO changed everything. It created a new model for business. You didn't need profits anymore. You just needed rapid growth and a great story about the future. A company's past became a liability. What mattered was its state of pure possibility. Suddenly, the entire U.S. stock market had adopted the personal psychology of Jim Clark. It also unleashed a tidal wave of wealth. Microsoft was 12 years old before people talked about Microsoft millionaires. Netscape was 1.5. Young engineers who had joined the company just months before were suddenly worth $10 million. Mark Andreessen, at 24, was worth $80 million. And Clark himself, who had made sure he kept the largest stake, became Silicon Valley's newest billionaire. The effect on the Valley was electric. Every engineer suddenly saw their job not just as a job, but as a high-stakes bet on the future. They looked at the guys at Netscape, who many considered the B team, and thought, "Why not me?" Silicon Valley became a giant roulette table, and everyone was looking for the next number to bet on. And the man everyone looked to, the man who seemed to know the future, was Jim Clark. Of course, with great success came great enemies. As Clark had predicted, Microsoft came after them, hard. They used their monopoly power to try and crush Netscape, leading to the famous antitrust trial. But for Clark, that was already the past. The moment Netscape went public, he was already looking for the next thing. He found it in his own misfortune. Diagnosed with a rare blood disease, he was forced to go to the hospital and was infuriated by the endless bureaucracy and paperwork. He saw another massive, broken system ripe for disruption. the $1.5 trillion US healthcare industry. He drew a simple diagram on a piece of paper, a diamond connecting doctors, patients, payers, and providers. In the middle, he put a star. That star was his next company, Healthscape, later renamed Healtheon. He went back to the venture capitalists and, this time, the terms were even more astonishing. He wouldn't run the company. He wouldn't even work there. He was now a conceptual artist. His job was to have the idea. Others would do the work. He just wanted to get back to his boat. And they agreed. Because Jim Clark now had the Midas touch. He recruited Pavan Nagam, the brilliant engineer from SGI, to lead the technical team. The day Pavan resigned from SGI, his home fax machine was flooded with over 300 resumes from engineers who wanted to join him, even though none of them had any idea what the new company even did. They just knew it was Jim Clark's next new thing, and that was enough. Healtheon's journey was rocky. The first IPO attempt failed spectacularly during a market crash in 1998. The venture capitalists thought the company was worthless. Clark, seeing their hesitation, offered to fund the entire company himself with another $40 million of his own money. It was a colossal game of chicken, and the VCs, terrified of missing out on the next Netscape, blinked. They threw their money in. A few months later, the market roared back. Healtheon went public, and its value exploded to over $3 billion on the first day. Pavan Nagam became worth $33 million. And Jim Clark added another $375 million to his fortune. He had done it again. Which brings us back to the boat. The Hyperion. All this time, through all these deals, Clark's real passion project was this magnificent, maddening, computerized yacht. It was his laboratory and his escape. It was the physical manifestation of his philosophy, a complete, self-contained world controlled by a computer. A world where he could finally impose the perfect logic he craved. But even perfection was temporary. As the book ends, Clark has just sailed the Hyperion across the Atlantic. He's standing in his cabin, the Monet and Picasso on the walls, and on his desk is not a souvenir from the trip, but an architectural drawing. It's a drawing of a new boat. A sailboat half again as big as the one he's on. Hyperion is a beautiful boat, he says. But, this new one, this will be the perfect boat. And in that one word, but, you find the engine of Jim Clark. The sweet, painful, unending feeling that what is not quite good enough. The itch that can never be scratched. The relentless, glorious, and deeply human search for the new thing. Commentary. So, what do we take away from this incredible story? It's more than just a tale of a rich man getting richer. It's a profound look at the nature of innovation, personality, and the chaotic engine of progress. The first lesson is about the power of dissatisfaction. Jim Clark was driven by a deep and abiding unhappiness with the way things were. He was unhappy with his childhood, unhappy with the Navy, unhappy with the rules of business. But unlike most people, he didn't just complain. He channeled that dissatisfaction into a ferocious energy to build something new. He shows us that progress doesn't come from contentment. It comes from people who look at the world and think, this could be better. They are the ones who are willing to tear everything down to build it up again. The second lesson is about the role of the outsider. Clark was never an insider. Even after he became a billionaire, he was temperamentally an outsider. He didn't play by the established rules because he didn't respect them. This outsider perspective was his superpower. It allowed him to see opportunities that the organization men, the people comfortable within the system, could never see. He wasn't burdened by the conventional wisdom of an industry. In fact, his ignorance of an industry, like healthcare, was often an advantage. It meant he wasn't afraid to propose something that experts would immediately dismiss as impossible. And finally, this story teaches us a powerful lesson about value. For decades, capitalism had a clear hierarchy. The money came first. The financiers, the bankers, the venture capitalists, they held the power. Jim Clark, through sheer force of will, flipped that upside down. He argued, and then proved, that the most valuable thing in the modern economy is the idea, the new thing. He made the world recognize that the true source of wealth isn't capital, it's the human imagination. The engineer, the creator, the highly oppositional geek in the basement, he made them the new royalty. So, as you think about your own path, what can you learn from Jim Clark? You don't have to build $3 billion companies. But you can cultivate that same spirit of productive impatience. When you see something that's broken, that's inefficient, that just doesn't make sense, don't just accept it. Get curious. Get irritated. Ask yourself, what if there's a better way? That question is the seed of every new thing. Start with the small things in your own life. Your study habits, a process at a part-time job, the way your sports team practices. Look for the friction, the waste, that's just how we do things. And then, dare to imagine something better. That was a summary of The New Thing, by Michael Lewis. We've journeyed through the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a photograph of a great adventure. It can show you where it went, but it can't make you feel the sea spray or the thrill of the climb. The real magic happens when you read the book for yourself. It's in the quiet moments when one of Lewis's perfectly crafted sentences or a single wild story about Clark hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is a map, designed to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the world of innovation and the restless spirit that drives it. Also, if this journey today has given you something valuable to think about, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.